Don't let the fact that we started recording silence you.
Well, courage to do the right thing when the right thing is needed. Courage to be prophetic when prophecy is needed. Courage to call out hypocrisy and to call out self-dealing and to call out wrongness when that is present.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Carla. Multicultural sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea of putting both of those together.
I think I did that because a lot of times people have been around other kinds of people, but they may have not intentionally strived to become sensitive to the people's culture. They just kind of added them in with everybody else.
As we're joining and gathering, this is a great time for your Zoom to be set on gallery view so that you can see everybody who's here. And Jonathan has the slide up with our question, which is great. But if you feel like it, you can just make this little divider in the middle of your screen, move left and right, and see the faces of those who have gathered here. And you are most welcome. Thank you so much for being part of this evening. We're starting out by connecting with one another, seeing new faces and seeing old friends. And we've got a question on the table for anybody who feels moved to answer. You can type in the chat. You can just unmute and go ahead and talk about it. For it to become the church of the brethren that you want it to be, what qualities do you want in its leaders and why? We've heard courage, we've heard cultural sensitivity, and a deeper cultural sensitivity than just saying, yeah, let's add some more diversity to the table, but actually taking the time to be connecting with people in the richness of their diversity. That's my summary, Carla. Feel free to correct me and improve on it. And now that our room is filling up, I think it's even harder just to shout out responses to a question, but you really are most welcome to respond to this question we have on the table. For it to become the church of the brethren that you want it to be, what qualities do you want in its leaders and why?
Don't all speak at once.
I think if you just shut the door. Well, there's Deb.
Yeah, this is the best part of the Zoom meeting, is just scrolling through and seeing who else is here. Carol Elmore is typing in the chat. I'm excited to listen this evening. Welcome, Carol from Roanoke, Virginia, who is also on Program and Arrangements Committee. Thank you. And Cindy and Kathy offer integrity. Absolutely. Thank you. So we have courage, we have cultural sensitivity in a deep way, and integrity. Those sound like leadership qualities that we need.
One that I would add would be a sense of humor. Sometimes we get so serious that I would like a church that we can laugh once in a while.
Now that we are up to over 26 people, I'm at the point where I can't see you all on one screen and I have to scroll, which is both a joy and a sorrow. It's wonderful to see all of you here. We're just beginning by seeing who else has come. Feel free to type into the chat. Feel free to unmute and share. This is an open space for it to become the Church of the Brethren that you want it to be. What qualities do you want in its leaders? Why?
I'd like to add that I'd like to see a Church of the Brethren where every voice of any age is accepted, valued the same way.
Thank you. Hey, Jesse Huff types in the chat. I want our leaders to be inclusive, accepting, celebratory, and fearless. And not only is there a lot of wisdom in that response, but there's some compelling vision in there too. The ability to be bold yet loving to those who do not agree with them. Thank you, Terilyn. Well said. As I look around, I see some of you have been part of the Church of the Brethren longer than I've been alive, and some of you are even newer than me. But I can say in my lifetime, though all that you have lifted up have been what I have also been longing for, because I feel like my whole lifetime in the church has been an era of a lot of pressure on leaders and a lot of caution among leaders. And so the qualities of leadership that you're lifting up are just speaking to my deepest longings. And I'm so glad that we get to share this hour together this evening to talk more about what are these costs of leadership. And as it is now 8 o'clock for those of us in the Eastern time zone, I would invite and encourage you now to switch to speaker view, if you can find that on your Zoom, so that we can begin our formal program. Thank you, Bobby, for opening us.
Well, friends, I just want to welcome everyone to this second workshop jointly sponsored by Women's Caucus and Annual Conference Leadership and Nominating Committee. And we're really excited to see so many people from a diverse range of backgrounds and segments of the denomination. And we're really looking forward to sharing all of this with you. Just to give you a brief overview, our August workshop, in case you missed it, is available on our YouTube channel. And in that workshop, we looked at the nominating process, both for the nominator and the nominee, to really demystify and make transparent that process. We learned from nominating committee and annual conference leadership that many competent and called voices are lost along the way to the ballot. And so we wanted to really find ways to open that up for those who might not know how to nominate someone or choose not to accept a nomination. And so this workshop tonight is a follow-up on that. And we interviewed folks who have served in various capacities in elected positions and asked them a series of questions to really learn what some of the costs and challenges are around serving in these capacities. What are the logistical and emotional and social capital costs? And so over the course of this hour, you'll be hearing more about that with regards to specific and more general conceptions of leadership, and really hopefully exploring a sense of what leadership positions you or someone you know might be called to. There's still plenty of time to nominate folks and accept nominations. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Creator God, you have called people to leadership throughout salvation history and gifted and graced them with the abilities needed to guide and lead your people. And so we ask tonight, as we discuss and share about some of the challenges of leadership in this, our beloved denomination, that what is shared will be both inspiring and challenging. Bless the listening and the learning. Bless the sharing and the speaking. Bless the discussing and the conversing. And we ask especially that all of this work that we do together will lead us toward an ever more diverse and dynamic leadership and community in this, our beloved Church of the Brethren. In Jesus' holy name we pray. Amen.
I had an opportunity to interview a number of people who have either served in or are currently serving in some of the elected annual conference positions. And so we're excited to be able to share what we heard from them, recognizing that their comments may not represent the whole of all comments, but to clearly give us some ideas for some things to talk about this evening. So the first thing we did was to ask them about the amount of time that it takes for them. So Jonathan, if you want to get the screen sharing up, we'll start looking at what we got. We wanted to ask them about the practical costs of serving in a leadership role. So we began by looking at the different roles. And one of the first things that we found was that different roles require different amounts of time and energy and involvement. So let's click on that next line there, if you would. Yep, there you go. If we think about some of the roles, in particular the moderator role and the annual conference secretary role, one of the things that we heard was that these can really become full-time positions. And so when you think about the commitment that's made, a 3-year commitment for the moderator position, a 5-year commitment for the secretary position, the amount of time each year is very demanding. And as a result of that, because significant time is required of it, the ability for that to fit into one's family life or one's employment is really a factor that we'll talk about a little bit later this evening. We looked at the amount of travel that's required. Moderators travel rather heavily, not usually so much during COVID, but other times they do. Other people travel less, but they are needing to travel to Elgin periodically, a couple times a year, often for meetings, and then to be at annual conference. This is a pretty anticipated thing for many of us. I live in Northern Indiana, so if I needed to go to a meeting in Elgin, I could simply get in my car and in 3 hours I could be at Elgin. But when you think about the activities of travel for someone on the West Coast, someone who is in a remote location who has to drive several hours to get to an airport to go somewhere, the impact of travel gets to be rather extensive, simply because if I have a meeting Saturday morning, I might need to take Friday off from work, or if the meeting concludes Sunday evening, I might also need to be able to take Monday off from work. And so travel, while itself is not extensive, it still is demanding and impacts the family and employment. Technology is something that people talked about, that with the lessons of COVID, there must be an awareness of what technology skills you need to do to be able to fulfill your position, or to be open to the challenges of learning new technology skills or even some new technology. Go to the next slide. Thank you. One of the things we also asked persons was about what kind of financial commitments were required. And each one of them in all the positions on the annual conference ballot indicated that the costs associated with travel and being at a meeting was reimbursed, was paid for by the denomination. But what they also shared is that special costs that might be incurred because you have responsibilities at home. You might have animals that you can't leave. And as a result of that, you might need to have someone either care for your farm or care for your pets. If you have a dependent person in your family, or if you have young children, there are expenses associated with that kind of care as well. And so while up front, it looks like things are paid for, depending on how you live and what responsibilities you have, there might be costs that are not. So moving then into what skills are required. Different positions on the annual conference ballot require different kinds of skills. And we're going to hear from Deb Oskins about that for her particular role. But for a moderator's position, you really need the ability to listen. You need the ability to build support around a vision. You need to address organizational challenges. You need to be seen as someone able to shepherd the flock, which is the denomination. Those are good, strong, important leadership skills, and we heard some adjectives that might be used to describe them. But different positions, like those on BBT or pastoral comp and benefits, can require specific technical skills. Maybe it's bookkeeping skills. There might be other things that you need to have. Program and arrangements need certain kinds of skills. So one of the things we heard from people was the importance of making sure that what skills you have and the skills you enjoy using match up with the particular roles for which you are being nominated. And then the last thing that we heard was the tolerance for change that is needed and for challenge, because particularly in roles like the moderator role, but almost in all other roles as well, there has to be that ability to keep a clear head and a courageous attitude during the times when things are steady, and also during the times when they're very disrupted and antagonistic. And so it feels a little bit like, for some people, like they're driving in fog when things are crazy, tensions are high, it's unclear what's ahead of you. It's like driving in fog where we're always trying to focus on something that gives us a sense of where we are, what's familiar. And you keep praying that that fog will lift so that you can find your way forward. And so when considering these positions, it's also a matter of thinking through what your tolerance is for challenge and how well you handle that. Annalisa?
I'd like to tell you some of what we heard about the emotional and spiritual costs of being in leadership. Beyond just the time and the energy and potential financial costs, there are emotional and spiritual costs as well. So we heard from annual conference moderators and secretaries that this is very intense and stressful. For example, the moderator is the most prominent elected position in the denomination. The pressure is huge. As Carol already shared, both moderator and secretary can easily be a full-time job of your time, but it's also a full-time stress load to be carrying. We heard that the work is both grace-filled and traumatic. And since these roles are very prominent, it might be surprising to think that they don't necessarily feel full of power, or that that power might be very fleeting in that 1 year as moderator. The power comes and goes very quickly. One former moderator shared, after passing the gavel to the next moderator, it was like this person had become invisible. And I think that's an opportunity for all of us to reflect on how we utilitize leaders in the church. How is it that a person becomes a tool for us through their leadership? And is that how we're actually called to see one another? We heard that the stress load is very high, and having faith that you are called into the role helps offset the stress. That requires a spiritual intelligence and a spiritual sense of being called to the role. That's what's required to pay the price of being in that leadership role. It will take every bit of physical, emotional, and spiritual investment you have and more, we heard from former moderators and annual conference secretaries. From mission and ministry board members, we heard that you have to have courage to speak up and ask questions. Courage is more than just a time commitment. Courage is an emotional and spiritual cost. We heard that you also need patience as much as courage. Patience, which requires emotional and spiritual intelligence. And now I'll try to move a little more quickly in the interest of time, but I want you to hear a few more things that we heard from these elected leaders and former leaders, that compassionate listening is critical, that one must be willing to respect the whole fabric of the Church of the Brethren, that this is a significant emotional stressor, resistance to change within the Church of the Brethren. Does that sound familiar? As a pastor, I can say that's probably my most significant emotional stressor as well, but it is for some on Mission and Ministry Board. And in a beautiful paradox, the greatest reward is seeing change. And then finally, from former and current members of Brethren Benefit Trust and On Earth Peace boards, we heard a few other things. Now, on one hand, we could say that their work is a bit more specialized than annual conference secretary, moderator, or mission and ministry board, who are serving the entire denomination in a sense for a specific period of time. But BBT and On Earth Peace have a very specialized role on their boards. And still, what we heard about the emotional costs is that while the work is specialized, context is everything. And each of the leaders I spoke to said what is most costly for them emotionally and spiritually are denominational tensions. Denominational tensions impact their work in a deeply stressful way, in an exhausting and draining way. And so here are just a big, quick landscape of costs of being in an elected position, but we've realized that there are also costs in even being nominated, even being on the ballot for a position. And so I would like to invite Rhonda Pittman Gingrich to come off mute and on screen. And Rhonda, we want to hear from you about your own experiences of being nominated for leadership.
Thank you, Annalisa. I recognize that I have had opportunities to participate in denominational leadership that many others have not. However, I also understand the reality that I have 3 strikes against me that will prevent a large number of people from ever voting for me. I am a woman who is a member of a theologically progressive congregation who lives west of the Mississippi. With that said, I have served in a number of capacities that were not elected positions, but rather appointed positions. But I have also had the experience of being put on the ballot by nominating committee, but not being forwarded to the delegate body by standing committee, of being on the ballot for moderator, but not elected by the delegate body, and of being on the ballot for program and arrangements committee and getting elected. And I've learned from each of these experiences or experienced that emotional cost related to each of these. When I was asked to allow my name to go on the ballot for moderator, there is a significant weighing of the pressures that you might face related to potential business. And the year that I was on the ballot was the year that the special response process kicked into gear. And so the item of business would have come before, would have then come before the delegate body the year that I would have been a moderator. But in addition, if you allow your name to go on the ballot, you have to prepare yourself to win. You have to consider, this might seem really trivial, but as a woman, you have to consider what you might wear to the service of consecration, some business attire that is suitable for the gravity of the call, but which also will allow you to kneel and stand without embarrassing yourself. I began to prayerfully dream about the theme, and I had to block dates on my calendar for potential meetings. So it was really, really difficult not to be elected after mentally preparing myself to be elected. It was difficult to set aside those dreams and plans, and it was difficult to even hear expressions of affirmation and support that people offered to me after the election, because there was grief. And I felt rather fragile. And when nominated again for the position of moderator, which has happened over the years, my discernment was colored not just by a sense of God's call, but consideration of context and whether there was any realistic chance of being elected. And I never again accepted a call to allow my name to go on the ballot for moderator. Real quickly, I would just say about being on the ballot for Program and Arrangements Committee and being elected. When the ballot came out that year, I fully expected I would not win because I once again found myself on the ballot against a man, and so was surprised when I won. But I also would say that in spite of the costs, I would affirm what some of the interviewees have said, in that there is incredible joy in serving and the opportunity to build relationships with people from across the denomination and to engage in meaningful work.
Thank you, Rhonda. You have given us a rich overview of some of the behind the scenes costs that we might not even have thought about without having been nominated. So thank you very much. And I want to share another story about an emotional cost of simply being nominated. And this story came up in our August workshop. I'm going to post into the chat a link if you were not able to be at the August workshop, or you just want to watch it again. There's a link to that workshop. But in August, a question was raised about a gay person being removed from the ballot because of his sexuality. And we believe that question was referring to Jess Hoffert's experience in 2019 when he was on the ballot for Mission and Ministry Board. And with Jess's permission, we're sharing his Facebook post from that time. And Jess says, "I don't say this often enough, but I love the church. I love the fact that I was raised next to a rural Church of the Brethren in Southeast Minnesota with a pastor who also happens to be my dad. I love that the members of that congregation have supported, cheered for, and loved me from infancy into my professional career. I love that, though far from perfect, the church has been a steadfast compass for me as I've journeyed through life. My heart breaks when the church is used as a weapon to discriminate against, oppress, and instill fear in others, especially minorities. When the teachings of Jesus get drowned out by calls for rigid laws that place power over peace. It's happened for thousands of years, and it continues to happen today, as I was recently reminded. This year, my name is on the Church of the Brethren's denominational ballot to serve a 5-year term on our Mission and Ministry Board. Just to be considered is an honor. And if given the opportunity to serve, I look forward to working with congregations around the world to help build bridges of understanding and support as we navigate what it means to be a church living peacefully, simply together. There is a small but vocal group of people in the Church of the Brethren who are trying to get my name removed from the ballot because I am gay. These are people who I don't know and who don't know me. All they know, all they seem to care about is my sexual orientation. No concern for how deeply I've been involved in the church or for the many beautiful traits I'm sure we share as followers of Jesus." And Jess's post goes on, and I can share the rest of it with you later, but in the interest of time, I just want to lift up for us the emotional cost, the spiritual cost of simply being nominated if you are someone who could be marginalized, who could be harassed because of some aspect of your identity. And so what happened when Jess was on the ballot in 2019 is that there was this uproar among a minority of people in the church wanting his name to be removed. And his name was not removed, but someone was nominated from the floor. And when that's happened other times in my experience, like when 2 women were up for moderator and a man was nominated from the floor, the message that I have seen in those moments is these names are not acceptable. And that was a message for Jess and for people who love Jess, is that his name was not acceptable. That is an emotional cost. And that emotional cost and Jess was not elected, but that emotional cost continues on if someone is elected and ends up being one or one of the only women or LGBTQ persons or persons of color on a committee or in a role, that becomes an emotional cost that not everyone at the table is paying to be part of a leadership position, but some of us do carry that cost. One of the people that I interviewed is the parent of a gay man. And this leader said that by far the greatest emotional cost to being on a board at the denominational level is not knowing who knows that my son is gay, and how will that come up? Will there be a backlash against me? Or what homophobic comments will I hear from people who do or don't know that my son is gay? That emotional cost is not shared equally among all of us. And I'd like to just offer one opportunity. If all of this doesn't sound familiar to you, or if you just want to hear more stories about these kinds of dynamics, Women's Caucus has 11 podcast episodes, and I just put the link in the chat. And these are interviews with people who can really speak with a lot of personal experience and authority about these emotional costs of being in leadership and being part of the church. And I would encourage you to go listen to some of those stories. So what did we miss on the emotional cost question? What emotional costs did we miss? Go ahead and type them into the chat if there are some that you haven't heard lifted up yet. And I see that the conversation continues about financial and practical costs, that even if your travel is reimbursed, you still need some money upfront to pay for your travel. You need some physical and other kinds of capacity to be able to do all of that travel, to leave whatever is happening at home. Debbie's suggesting moving to more online meetings would open up positions for people who hold hourly wage jobs, have family responsibilities, etc. And the fact that all of these positions are volunteer, you don't get paid for any of this work, limits this to a small group of people who have the time, money, and circumstance to do this. Bobby Dykema writes, stay tuned to a query from Pacific Northwest on the 2022 ballot on moving to online options for annual conference going forward, COVID or no COVID. Did we miss any other emotional costs? And you don't have to just type them in now. You can keep the conversation going as we move on in our presentation. And don't worry, there are some small group interactions coming up soon.
We ask people who have served or are currently serving in positions, what type of social interaction is required? We ask them questions about how important is it to know a wide group of people? How much of the Brethren history do you need to know? How much of the unwritten history or the unwritten policies do you need to know? What do you need to know to make it through this process? And so we are going to move into that conversation. And I would begin it by saying that leadership has at least two components: people who lead and people who follow that leader. But the most effective leaders are the people who look around and bring into the conversations and the orientations far more than just the people who follow them without questions or without demands other than simply to be there. So as we think about it, effective leadership requires the capability to listen widely, the need to know and to be open to the language of those with whom you agree and those with whom you don't agree. And so I'd like to read some words from some of the people that were talking with us. They said, you must go into the work being true to yourself, but also committed to representing the whole church. You need to know the different groups if you expect to lead them. You must look at the whole church, then broaden your leadership skills to listen with an open heart. Integrity is critical. Listening is critical. The denomination won't survive if we cannot see hope and progress in the midst of our dead ends. We need to come together, which I found interesting, that sense of how you keep that spirit, that courage, that optimism alive, and your credibility, even when you're talking with people that you know that you have significant differences of opinions around theology or practice. We also ask about how you need to know how things work. What does it take to get into a position like this? And so I'm going to call on Deb Oskin, interview her for a little bit. Deb is going to tell you a little bit about things because you have to be known to be elected. People have to know who you are. And they also should know a little bit about your work, because if you have the credibility to do the work of that position, people should know what that is. So Deb, for you, you were nominated, but you didn't win. How did you approach
No.
that situation? Because you've been successful since that time. So how did you make the magic work?
Well, I was going back and trying to figure out what my history with clergy taxes in the Church of the Brethren was. And I realized I started doing these seminars for Bethany back in 2006, but that was a little group of people in a classroom on the seminary campus in Richmond. And so not very many people were aware that I was doing that. And I didn't really start doing that online where more people could log on until 2012. And I was first nominated for pastoral compensation and benefits in 2013, where I was up against a woman with a Brethren name. So there's one strike. And then I gave them a picture of me that I thought looked really good. But I was a table facilitator, and one of the women at my table told me she didn't recognize me from the picture. So note to self, choose a picture that looks like you, not a picture that you think makes you look really good. So I didn't get elected that year. After that, in 2011, actually, I started doing annual conference insight sessions for the Office of Ministry, and in 2013 for BBT as well. And before you know it, I was doing 3 annual conference insight sessions every annual conference. So by 2015, 2016, I would go to annual conference and people I didn't know were walking up to me and calling me by name. And I'm like, I don't know who you are, but they knew me because they'd seen me on the Bethany webinar that was an all-day thing now, and they'd seen me at these insight sessions. And so I'd hit a tipping point by 2016 or so where a lot of people knew me for what I did, right? Talking about clergy taxes. So by the time I was up again in 2018 for this specialized slot on pastoral compensation and benefits, secular compensation professional, I won.
So some of us don't have those tax accounting skills that you have.
Yeah.
Some of us are not known for playing the organ or the piano like Jonathan and others do. We don't have the preaching history. How can an average person like me be known in the denomination?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that since you asked me, and I honestly have no idea. I mean, I have a pretty robust bio. I'm an ordained minister. I've been the church board chair. I preach occasionally. I have been the district board chair. I've been the district moderator. That's it's a pretty robust history, but I don't have a clue how I would get on standing committee. I don't have a clue how to get on mission and ministry board. The only reason anyone knows me in the denomination is because I do clergy taxes. So I have no idea how. I think it's the people who know you and the ways, the relationships in which they know you, right? The organizations they know you in, and the trying to come up with the words, right? It's the relationships they know you in, the organizations they're working with you in, the when they see you, where they see you, that all puts them all together.
Thank you for that. One of the things we do know is that there is the annual conference schedule, and there's all the other stuff that fills in the cracks between events. And those are times where you often see people standing in the hallway for hours at a stretch, standing at tables, hanging out in the hotel lobby, having lunch together, coffee together. Because if you are a person who is an introvert and want to get out of there and go someplace else where there are not so many people, it'll be tougher to be known. You simply do need to put yourself in a position of being visible. Speaking at the microphones can help. Obviously, the position that you represent may or may not be an advantage, but there are simply ways to be evidenced. Some people have said that just being in the annual conference choir gets their faces in front of other people. So while there are skill access points, there are also personal behavior access points. And you've got then your resume that you bring in that says, I've been in all these different positions and I bring that background, that understanding of systems. Thanks very much, Deb. And Lisa?
Now I would invite you to switch your Zoom view back to gallery because we're actually going to go into some breakout rooms. Bobby, did you set those up?
Give me about one more minute. and
Okay, great. I'll tell
set.
you more about what we're going to do then. I just wanted to make sure she was on it. So we're going to go into small groups of about 4 people, and we would encourage you to talk about whatever you most want to talk about that you've heard so far, whether it's additional analysis of costs of leadership, or if it's responding more to this latest set of conversation about how to be visible in the work that you feel called to do, because we are focusing a lot on the costs of leadership, but we don't want that to happen to the extent that we forget calling is true. And there has been some good conversation in the chat about barriers, such as Jesse pointing out, if you have to be known, if you have to be visible to get elected, then young people are eliminated right off the bat. And I feel sympathy to that sense. Absolutely, Jesse. So in our breakout rooms, let's think about that. Let's think about what are ways that people can become more visible, expressing their own call to the work that they are called to do. And more good ideas keep coming. So Bobby, as soon as you're ready, you can send us out. And FYI, folks, this is really quick. You get like 6 minutes. So don't wait, don't be polite. Just say who you are, meet each other, and dive into conversation.
Central Indiana. We live near Lafayette, Indiana, and attend the Lafayette Church of the Brethren. My husband is Mark. He grew up in the Church of the Brethren. I did not.
Is he the pastor?
No.
No. I just
He's not. He's Steve Crane is our pastor at Lafayette.
Oh, yeah.
okay. It's just Mark Kripe sounded familiar to me too, and I don't know how.
Well, an old Brethren name, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm here not with interest or intentions of going into leadership, but I want to know how those of us that are not in leadership can support others that might be qualified or able or need encouragement.
Bless you. What do you have questions about as you hear this?
I'm not sure what my questions would be. Maybe somebody else has a question. I
Well,
would say that I'd like for everyone to hear what's been said in the last 10 or 15 minutes.
Mhm.
There's some incredible information in the chat.
And I can tell you that from our interviews of the various folks who have served in balloted positions, that the one commonality across all of those diverse ways of serving was the need for prayer. And not only to be have a rich personal prayer life, but to have a rich prayer support system. And so that is the absolute first thing that would come to my mind to support people in leadership, people who are accepting their nominations to leadership. And is just to really pray for them.
That's good. That makes good sense.
Another thing I'm hearing that I hadn't really thought of before is people talking about if they do not have their own means to get to and from an airport or whatever, there may be opportunities when you know of somebody in your area to say what would be helpful. Need somebody to watch your cat while you're away, or just all kinds of things.
I would say also that if there are people that you know in your congregation or district that you see as having qualities for leadership, to maybe encourage them or to nominate them and encourage them to accept that nomination. And I'll tell you also that both this workshop and the August workshop were recorded, and so this information will continue to be available for whoever you want to share it with. So.
Good.
One of the things I've been thinking about in preparation for today is that I, as a young fellow, always thought that if we could just have more women in ministry and in district executive leadership and in positions of leadership in the various districts, that it would change and we would be electing at denominational level. And I have not seen that happen as much as I would like. It has happened. I mean, we are doing that more, but it's not to the level where we have an easiness of feeling like we have male and female equal representation. And I'm not sure yet what it is that we have to get past. I know there's some mentality in some folks, they just don't vote for women, but I think it also has to do with not feeling like there's time and energy when you're raising kids as much.
Mm-hmm.
And because our churches make pastors' times available, but people in lay positions don't. You know, employers don't see this as a benefit for their employees to be investing in something of this kind of leadership training.
True.
Oh, Connie was going to say something earlier. We better get it in if we want to have 90 seconds.
Well, I was just thinking when I was hearing Rhonda's story, I was been sort of in the same position where I was appointed to positions, but I was never elected from the annual conference ballot. And so, you know, I came to just accept that was okay because I got to do some interesting and neat things. And so it felt like that was a call as well. And so, you know, even since that, I mean, being asked to do district executive work and then interim district executive work, that's, you know, that's significant leadership that I offered to the church. So, you know, I felt like I've been called out, and I'm not raising a family. I'm not doing any of those things. I'm a single person. So that's been sort of unusual, I think, I think I've been the only district executive who's been single. I mean, out of all that I've been aware of.
You said something important. Boards pay attention to who was on the ballot when they start thinking about who they're going to appoint to their boards.
Oh, for the ones that aren't elected?
Mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
it can be a step towards a service position of leadership at equal par, just not elected from annual conference.
And that's how I got to the National Council of Churches, you know, quite a number of years ago, because I wasn't elected, but then whoever it was, I don't know if it was General Board at the time, somebody appointed me.
There was a study done, not across church necessarily, but secular jobs, that indicated that men on average will apply for a position if they meet at least 60% of the qualifications, and women tend not to apply unless they meet close to 100% of those qualifications.
Wow.
Yeah. So I wonder if that sense of not being qualified might be part of what's dissuading people.
I think
Lack of confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think you're right, Bobby. And I think sometimes we don't see.
So what did you hear? What key insights and new ideas or helpful stories did you hear? We would love it if you would type into the chat some highlights from your small group discussion, just because we want to be able to see as many ideas as possible. The chat is the fastest way to do that.
someone who is typing didn't mute their microphone, and it's picking up a lot of the typing noises.
Thank you, Dale. We've got some ideas coming already, and this was happening in my small group too. We were talking about what other ways could we do this? And don't worry, we're going to ask that question specifically later, but go ahead and type those ideas into the chat as well. Including Carol Shepherd's pointing out that a system where all those asked to be on the ballot would actually be on the ballot means not 4 nominees, but 2, because right now the math is such that even just being asked to be on the ballot means you're one of 4, then standing committee trims that down to 2, and then the delegate body trims that down to 1. And so it's like 1 leader out of 4 who got themselves invested in the position, only 1 is going to serve. And that math isn't a great stewardship of our leadership within the church. Oh, Jesse's pointing out that seasoned leaders have a responsibility to nominate people too. And we are going to get into some of the nitty gritty, getting some insight from those who are part of nominating committee and in your conference offices are going to share with us some tips on nominations in just a couple minutes. Bobby says we talked about ways to support those in leadership, especially prayer, and about how studies have shown, oh, all these great chats coming in and losing them. Hopefully you are all reading along and not waiting on me. Studies have shown that in the secular job market, men will apply if they meet at least 60% of qualifications, but women apply only if they meet close to 100%, perhaps a lack of confidence. Fascinating. The importance of and the need for intentional leadership development and mentoring, whether that be in congregational settings, at camp, on college boards, with Dunkerpunks, youth cabinet, mentoring. Thank you, Rhonda. Those are great examples, because this idea that young people don't have the name recognition, well, that's true until you start listening to Dunkerpunks or paying attention to NYC and National Young Adult Conference. And all of a sudden, young people have a lot of name recognition. So we all have a responsibility to be paying attention to the spaces where young people are or where newer brethren are leading. Francis writes, mentoring is very important, bringing new people onto committees, into leadership, even if they are not yet perfectly prepared. We need to keep bringing new people into the leadership preparation pipeline. Absolutely. Nancy Sollenberger writes, mentorship is essential to help newbies learn the expectations of leadership positions and to call them out to serve. Bob Gross says, we need to think about calling as well as being called. And one of the interesting statistics that Women's Caucus has been curious about is which districts are nominating people and which aren't, and just anything that can help us pay more attention to who's actually doing that important lifting up of leaders. And the challenge has been put on the table that Northern Plains district seems to consistently nominate more people than any other district. So maybe there's some healthy competition for us to think about which district can nominate the most people. I'll just highlight a couple more because then we're going to move on. Marilyn writes, I continue to think that being a woman keeps many gifted people out of leadership rather than being known or previous experience. And that has been the story that I have been taught and experienced in my lifetime. But you know, this last annual conference, the statistics had started to shift. Who knows why? Probably many factors. Rhonda lifts up something very important: the cost of not feeling free to say all that you might want to say when in leadership. That is a constant refrain that we have been hearing from leaders, elected and staff leaders. So please do, I'll stop talking so that you can just quickly skim the rest of the chat. And of course, we can save this chat, and we're recording this meeting. You can come back and look at it later. But as we're talking about strategy and using our resources and our energy well, we do want to remember the context in which we're in, that we are approaching one more deadline for making nominations. And we'd like Kim McDowell, who's chair of the nominating committee, to remind us very briefly how this nomination process works.
I'll try to talk you through this very quickly. Nominations for the year ahead open at the end of any annual conference, and from that point on, anyone can make a nomination. This is the website, the nominations website on the annual conference page. So if you go to annual conference and then to nominations, you will see Kurt's overview of the process, and then up in the upper right, FAQ kind of thing about nominations. Most of you know this. Anyone can submit a nomination, and you would look at that form, complete a nomination form. You click on that form, and you need to give your own contact information and name. You need to give the name of the person you're nominating and their contact information, and very importantly, the reasons why you are proposing their name as a candidate for this office. That is something that the nominating committee pays good attention to. So if you fill that form out, you don't have to have the permission of the person. What we hope you will do is that after you have submitted that form, you'll call or otherwise contact the nominee and tell them, I have nominated you and this is why. And you'll take it very seriously, because that call can make the difference between someone taking the next step or not. Because the next step for the person who's nominated is that he or she needs to fill out the Nominee Information Form, which is on that same page. You can look at it and return that to the annual conference office. So many times there are lots of nominations, but few of those nominees return their forms, and then they're not considered in the pool. If they do return their forms, they will be a part of the process for the nominating committee in January as that group gets together, and will be considered in the whole pool of possibilities. The nominating committee, as you know, narrows that pool to 4 candidates and then submits that ballot to the full standing committee, and the full standing committee votes online and narrows it down to 2, and those are the 2 names that appear on the annual conference ballot. I think that's the quick and dirty. So
Thank you, Kim, for that recap, and definitely follow up on those links that are in the chat. And now we'd like to hear some tips from Jim, Kim, and/or Rhonda. Share some tips on making nominations, and also for people who have been nominated. What should we say on those forms? What should we not say? What are strategic ways to invest our time in how we do nominations?
I made just a couple of notes, so I'm going to start and then ask Jim and Rhonda to jump in. I would say that I already alluded to this, that what you say about why you're nominating someone, if you are a nominator, really matters. And the more specific you can be, the more thorough you can be about that person's experience and character and ability to work in a diverse setting, the better. That really helps the nominating committee and will make a difference in the way that person gets considered. Don't assume that they're known, as we've talked about, because you may know them, but lots of other people may not, and the nominating committee may not know them. You can submit as many nominations as you want to. I think, what matters to the nominating committee is that they feel genuine, they feel heartfelt, they feel prayerful. And so, if we got a slate of 25 nominees from one person, it would be a harder thing to take that seriously. We do pay attention to when someone is nominated more than once. we were asked by the caucus members, what about a group deciding that we're all going to nominate someone because we're so convinced of that? That feels a little bit more manipulative, I will be frank, and not as, probably not something that will gain a positive response from the nominating committee. But if spontaneously several people nominate someone, that's heard. For nominees, I want to just say a couple of things. To be really aware of the theological divides in the church as you write what you write, not to temper it overly much. I think your honesty and clarity about your own understanding is really key, but also key for the nominating committee to hear, and the standing committee, I think, when they make their decisions, is something about your own respect for other perspectives and willingness to work to come to agreement with people who are very different from you. When you fill out Form 2, I think some really concrete information about your interest, your experience, your gifts. Don't be too vague. Don't be too general. We are very interested in those who are expressing a commitment to intercultural collaboration and sensitivity, and to those who really exhibit a genuine interest in the role and can speak to that in any way. So I want to ask Rhonda and Jim to add to that, but those were a few of the things that came to my mind.
Kim, I would just say amen. That is well said. The piece that I would say more specifically would be, as much as possible in comments about the person you're nominating or about yourself, if you're the one being nominated, make as much as possible show that how that will apply to this particular role.
Yeah.
Because your comments should be different if you're being nominated for Mission and Ministry Board than if you're being nominated for Annual Conference Secretary, because they should indicate how you're qualified and how your past experiences will be helpful with that. So yeah, I just think it's really important, and it is important for everyone to know that you should not nominate yourself. The form itself says that, but we every year still seem to have a couple people who don't understand that. We have to send it back and say, kind of awkward, you need to have someone else nominate you. That's great if you want to be nominated, but we'd like to hear from two voices, not just one.
I think that Jim and Kim have touched on the high points for this.
Well, thank you. And while you're all close to your unmute button, we'd also like to hear from you which positions are open this year for nominations, and especially tell us which positions you've received the fewest nominations for. Where do we need to focus some attention and energy?
Rhonda, I'll start by just simply identifying the offices. You have the statistics, or you want us to use the ones you sent to us earlier?
I think that you can use the ones that I sent to you last week. I don't think they have not changed significantly. There might have been one or two come in, but I think they're pretty accurate.
Okay, so the positions that are open this year are moderator-elect. Every year we choose a moderator to serve for 3 years. The Annual Conference Secretary, which only happens every 5 years. So that's all of these positions are on the nomination page of the website, of the Annual Conference website, and you can see them there with the description, information about them. Program and Arrangements Committee will choose a person. Every year they choose one. Oh, good, thank you. Mission Ministry Board, this year we have 2 of the areas that we will be choosing from, and they're listed there. You will notice in Area 1 that Atlantic Northeast is not listed, and that's because there are already 2 people from that district on board, and so we can't choose another one from that particular district. But the districts you can choose from, the ones in bold, pay attention to, because they have not been represented for some time. It'd be really good to get some nominees from those districts: Northern Ohio, Northern Indiana. Bethany Seminary, this year we choose someone who represents the colleges, someone who represents clergy. BBT, every year we choose one and they have their skill set request. Honors Peace, every year we choose one and we have their skill set request. And Pastoral Compensation Benefits Advisory Committee, this year it needs to be someone who is clergy. So those are the offices that are open. Kim, you want to speak to the ones that have the least from?
Yeah. Well, what Rhonda reported to us was that so far there are 21 nominations. 2 of those have returned their forms. So right now we are not in an unusual position in the calendar year, but it's really growing in urgency that people take this seriously and start submitting nomination forms. There are several that have no nominations as yet. And I say this about the returning of the forms. That may be in process. That may happen sometime soon. They may be thinking about it. They may be working on it. And there may be quite a few more that come in, but not yet. But there are so far no nominations for Bethany college trustees from the college or from the clergy. And there are no nominations for Pastoral Compensation and Benefits Committee from the clergy. So if the nominating committee gets to January, to the meeting, and there are not enough nominations, there will be a scramble to try to identify people and contact them and get them to agree to be in the pool all within about 48 hours. And it's totally unfair and, contrary to the way that we want this process to work. But that's what happens just because the pressure is on. And often we come up with wonderful candidates. I'm guessing that a number of you have been called and agreed to serve at that point in the year when there are not enough nominations from other places. But ideally, that won't be the way it works.
I just want to interrupt because we have a question from the chat about the numbers. Are these the stats that you just reported, are they normal or uncharacteristically low this year?
Well, Jim has the longest view of this. I've been on nominating committee. This is the 4th year of 2 terms, so I have that view. And it isn't abnormal to have few nominations at this stage. They pick up as the deadline increases. Most of us are procrastinators. The deadline is theoretically December 1st. Usually, if there are still open offices, we'll take them after that, but we want them in by the 1st if at all possible. I felt the last year, and I wonder this year whether there is some factor that is related to the energy and hopefulness and discouragement in the church. So I don't know. Jim, you might have a comment on that, or Rhonda, you might too.
Oh, I would just say that we have had this issue every year to the point that a few years ago, we started having a special call to all of the standing committee members to give them an update as to where we were in November and saying, please get in gear. And people would then suddenly make nominations. We used to joke that our deadline was the day that people started. They would see that says due by December 1, and so we would start getting them then. And that is totally uncomfortable over a holiday season for people who know we have to have things ready in January. So please, the sooner you can work on this, the better it is. Now, I understand some people will say, gosh, that's a long way off to think about being elected all next year. And maybe, they kind of put it off. And I think we need to be getting in gear now to say that we need the nominations to be doing their prayer now, if necessary, and next month getting the forms in, please.
Another great detailed question from the chat is, when a position says it's someone representing the clergy, does that need to be somebody who is currently actively serving in a congregation? Could it be a retired pastor? Does it have to be someone who's been officially licensed, ordained? So any insight on that?
Okay, so what that's referring to is that when we're talking about pastoral compensation and benefits, the annual conference intended, and I should let Deb speak. Deb, go ahead.
I was just going to say what I think you were going to say. Pastoral comp, that is a serving pastor.
Right.
And we're really hoping for a female pastor because it's been a very long time since a female clergy person has filled that slot. And right now, I'm the only female member of pastoral comp and benefits.
And a female pastor who writes well would be really excellent.
Says our last chairperson, Beth Cage, yes.
Yeah. When we're talking about Bethany Seminary, I think they're also looking for someone who is practicing clergy, who is in that role. They bring a perspective that the seminary needs in terms of thinking about how its education is making a difference in the lives of those who are actively engaged in pastoral ministry. So I think you kind of look at the situation and say, why would they ask for that? Well, it's because they need that perspective of someone who's actively engaged.
I'm realizing that it's 3 minutes after we said we're going to close, but we want to just do like literally 2 more things after what I'm about to say, which is just the nuts and bolts. If you are looking for a CEU, a continuing education credit for being here, I'm posting a link in the chat. You can just go put your name and email in this spreadsheet and you will be counted as present. And if you have any trouble with that, oh, Jonathan just posted it too. If you have any trouble filling that out, just put your name and email in this chat and say CEU, and we'll make sure to mark you present. And now Jonathan is going to get us to just focus for one quick 90 seconds on who we will be nominating this year.
Yeah, so we were initially going to take some time to brainstorm who we would like to nominate this year. If we wanted to like a quick flurry in the chat, that's fine, or we can just move on since it's getting late. I think I'll pass it over to Carol.
Carol, you're muted.
For whatever reason, we have designed leadership roles that favor those with flexible schedules. They're retired, or perhaps they have a church that's willing to release them from part of their work. We've designed it for people with sufficient means to keep their families functioning smoothly while they're engaged in the work of the church. But if we're going to grow the church, as it reflects so much more than this, we need to think about what changes need to be considered. And so we are going to be holding a thinking event. I know that doesn't sound really formal, but it's an intent for us to get together and think about this. So on November 2nd, 2021, 8 o'clock, it's election day. We're going to talk about elections. We want you to join us for about an hour, maybe a little bit more, when we open it to questions and conversations. And let me give you 3 quick examples of what it could be. In the past, the annual conference secretary was divided into a corresponding secretary and a recording secretary. Those were combined for convenience, consistency, all those kinds of things. But whether or not that's still the best model for the work that's required of the annual conference secretary is worthy of a good, deep dive. So that's something we could think about. We can look at practices that are helpful. For example, MMB has a wonderful orientation and mentoring program that can help people quickly come up to speed, even when they don't have a long history within the denomination. We also need to look at the process of nominations from the floor. We understand the spirit calling, but we also understand the damage it can do. So we want to look at 2 things, both the roles as we have defined them for leadership, and then the ways that our processes help those or hinder those people from being successful. So join us November 2nd, election night, same time, same station as tonight. We'll talk together. bring a beverage, bring a best friend, bring your best ideas. And so we close tonight with great gratitude for you being here. We look forward to more conversations because so much rich information has been provided through your contributions. We thank you for that. Good night, everybody.
Thanks to all of you who made this possible. This was an important conversation.
Looks like Jonathan had to hop off to get to another meeting, but says 44 people, and that was great. I mean, it was 44 devices, more people than that actually. And it felt fast and it felt full. And I don't think we missed anything that we shouldn't have missed. And I think it was a good partnership again with the AC